Immigration has been a crucial part of Canadian history ever since Canada even became a country, with millions of refugees immigrating to Canada, with the vast majority of these immigrants traveling to Canada via ocean liner. However, we are going to discuss one particular spot that picked up more immigrants than almost any other area in Canada. What you are looking at here is the Pier 21 Museum, which I visited to identify certain push and pull factors within the museum. But what even are push and pull factors? A push factor is a negative motivation that compels people to leave their current home of origin, while a pull factor is a condition that attracts people to live in the new place. So let's take a little trip through this museum and see what we can identify. Here's just a little video of me wandering through the museum. The museum is very, very nice, but this will bring us to our first exhibit that I want to discuss. Okay, so this first exhibit is Marion Ferguson. When she was just 13 years old, her father saved her family from the Holocaust by gaining permission to come to Canada. They arrived at Pier 21 on March 7, 1939, and were welcomed by Sadie Finberg of the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society. She introduced them to so many kind people that they decided to remain in Nova Scotia instead of going. Now, this in particular would be identified as a push factor, as the Holocaust and the oppression of Jewish people is what drove them out of Europe in the first place. Now, this exhibit is titled Seeking a Safe Haven in Canada, and this would be identified as a pull factor, and it states in 1947, largely due to a shortage of labor, Canada began accepting displaced persons and political refugees from war-torn Europe. About 100,000 of the post-war immigrants fell to this group. Many were admitted to the country as laborers, while others were sponsored by employers, cultural organizations, or close relatives. That exhibit right there would be a pull factor because the displaced persons and the people needed in Canada attracted many immigrants from Europe. Now, this exhibit right here identifies some of the accommodations that were available at Pier 21. It states excitement and apprehension and fear were the constant compassions of the newcomers. Until you received an official landed immigrant stamp, you could still be denied. Most immigrants had no problems, but some were held back until health issues were resolved or proof of sponsorship of employment was provided. There were two types of quarters at Pier 21: accommodation dormitories for men and women, and individual detention rooms for people deemed a security risk. People in accommodation generally were free to come and go from the building, while those in detention were closely guarded. Now, these special accommodations for the people may have very much encouraged people to come to this particular location and encourage people to leave Europe and come to Pier 21, as most other piers who accepted immigrants did not have these special accommodations. So that made it a lot easier for immigrants fleeing to Pier 21. So I took the Pier 21 Canadian citizenship exam and I ended up getting a 70%. Getting a 70% was pretty eye-opening. It reminded me of how much Canadian history, government structure, and civic information I don't actively think about on a day-to-day basis, even though I wasn't actually studying for the real exam. The exam overall showed me that there are still areas worth brushing up on, especially if I want a better understanding of how country functions beyond what we learn in our school. The exam felt a little bit too basic and didn't always capture the complexity of the actual test. It felt more as a history quiz rather than an actual Canadian citizenship test.